The Mongolian steppe stretched wide and endless, its rolling grasslands broken only by the thin line of the Khalkhin Gol River winding under a hot June sun. Horses grazed in the distance, their silhouettes hazy in the dust. This was a frontier of empires, where the Soviet-backed Mongolian People's Republic met Japanese-controlled Manchukuo. The land itself was desolate, but its position on the map carried weight. Here, in 1939, Soviet and Japanese patrols faced off, staring each other down across an undefined border. Neither side would yield. The seeds of war were planted in the ambiguous lines that marked Asia's frontiers. The Soviets insisted the border followed the Khalkhin Gol River. The Japanese, through their puppet state of Manchukuo, claimed the line lay miles to the west. For the nomads who lived there, it was just grazing land. For Moscow and Tokyo, it was a test of resolve. On May 11, 1939, Mongolian horsemen crossed into the disputed zone. Manchukuo cavalry attacked, and the Mongols fell back. But when they returned, they brought Soviet troops with them. The confrontation escalated, muskets and sabers replaced by artillery and tanks. By summer, a forgotten war had begun. The Japanese army underestimated their opponent. They had beaten Chinese forces for years and believed Soviet troops would be no different. But Joseph Stalin sent reinforcements under the command of a general little known outside the Red Army, Georgy Zhukov. Stocky, tough, and relentless, Zhukov studied every detail of the terrain. He saw not just empty grasslands, but a battlefield ideal for mechanized war. While Japanese infantry clung to bayonet charges and rigid formations, Zhukov envisioned tanks, artillery, and aircraft striking together in coordinated sweeps. The steppe would become his testing ground. By June, fighting was constant. Japanese forces crossed the river in strength, attempting to seize the far bank. Their infantry advanced with determination, rifles and bayonets gleaming in the sun. For a time, they drove Soviet units back, leaving fields littered with bodies. But Soviet defenses stiffened. Zhukov poured in artillery, the thunder of shells echoing across the steppe, flattening Japanese trenches and scattering men who tried to regroup. Overhead, Soviet aircraft swarmed, dropping bombs that turned dry grass into firestorms. The heat was merciless. Soldiers on both sides fought in uniforms soaked with sweat, dust caked in their mouths. Japanese light tanks rattled forward, their thin armor no match for Soviet guns. The Soviets counterattacked with BT-5 and BT-7 tanks, their treads kicking up clouds of dirt. For many Japanese soldiers, it was their first encounter with modern armored warfare. Some fought on bravely with grenades and rifles, hurling themselves against steel behemoths in suicidal defiance. The casualty lists grew longer every day. July brought a massive Japanese push. Reinforced divisions stormed across the Khalkhin Gol under cover of night, determined to break Soviet lines. For days, the steppe became a cauldron. Machine guns tore through charging infantry. Mortars screamed overhead. Men fought hand-to-hand in trenches, bayonets and blades flashing in the dirt. But Zhukov anticipated the move. He shifted reserves into place and then unleashed his tanks in sweeping flanking attacks. Japanese units were caught in the open, pounded by shells from every direction. By the end of the offensive, their momentum was broken, their divisions mauled. Still, Tokyo refused to admit defeat. More men were thrown into the fight, swelling Japanese strength to tens of thousands. The Soviets matched them, building an army of over 50,000 with hundreds of tanks and planes. The battle expanded into one of the largest clashes Asia had seen. Trenches scarred the land for miles. Smoke rose day after day as artillery duels turned the skies black. Nomadic herders fled the region, leaving only armies to fight and die. By August, Zhukov prepared for a decisive blow. He massed his forces quietly, stockpiling ammunition, fuel, and food. His plan was bold: a double envelopment, encircling the entire Japanese Sixth Army. At dawn on August 20th, 1939, the Soviet offensive began. Artillery pounded Japanese positions in a thunderous barrage. Aircraft swept low, strafing foxholes and convoys. Then, like a tide, Soviet tanks and infantry surged forward. On the flanks, Soviet armor smashed through weak points, swinging wide to close around the Japanese. In the center, infantry pinned them in place. The maneuver was textbook, executed with precision. Japanese soldiers fought fiercely, refusing to surrender, launching desperate counterattacks and often fighting to the last man. But they were surrounded. Ammunition ran low. Food and water dwindled. Entire battalions were annihilated. The steppe became a graveyard of shattered tanks, burning trucks, and bodies left where they fell. By early September, the battle was over. The Soviets and Mongolians had suffered around 17,000 casualties, dead, wounded, and missing. The Japanese losses were even higher, over 20,000 men killed and wounded, with entire regiments wiped out. The once proud Japanese Sixth Army limped back into Manchuria, broken and humiliated. The consequences of Khalkhin Gol reached far beyond Mongolia's grasslands. For Japan, the defeat was a turning point. Military leaders had long debated two strategies: strike north into Siberia to seize resources from the Soviet Union, or strike south into Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Khalkhin Gol settled the argument. The Red Army had proven it could not be easily beaten. Japan turned its gaze southward, toward Indochina, the Dutch East Indies, and ultimately Pearl Harbor. For the Soviet Union, the victory was a critical reassurance on the eve of global war. Stalin now knew his eastern frontier was secure. Just days after Zhukov's offensive began, the USSR signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Nazi Germany, freeing Stalin to focus westward. When Germany invaded Poland in September, Soviet troops joined in from the east, confident that Japan would not strike in Siberia. Khalkhin Gol had bought the Soviet Union the security it needed at a decisive moment. The battle also launched the career of Georgy Zhukov. His success in Mongolia marked him as one of the Red Army's brightest commanders. Within 2 years, he would command Soviet defenses at Moscow, later orchestrate victories at Stalingrad and Kursk, and ultimately accept Germany's surrender in Berlin. His reputation was forged not in Europe, but on the windswept steppes of Mongolia. Yet despite its significance, Khalkhin Gol slipped into obscurity. Europe was on the brink of all-out war, and within weeks, headlines shifted to Hitler and Poland. To most of the world, the clash in Mongolia was overshadowed, a footnote to the coming storm. But for the men who fought there, the memory never faded. Veterans recalled the endless grasslands littered with corpses, the smell of cordite and blood, the roar of tanks cresting the horizon, and the relentless sun beating down as friends fell beside them. Today, the fields along the Khalkhin Gol are quiet again. Small monuments stand where thousands once died. The river flows as it always has, a thin line cutting across the plains, carrying the echoes of a forgotten war. But the consequences of that summer reverberated across the globe. Japan turned south, the Soviets turned west, and in the choices born of blood and fire on the Mongolian steppe, the shape of World War II was set. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.